Alright, so this particular lecture is about how to use the debugger, or in Node.js term is called the inspector. I'm going to show you three terminals, three SSH terminals. This is the first one, this is the second one, and this is the last one. So the first one is used for starting a particular script. The second one is for the debugger, for interacting with the debugger. And then the third one is for showing the actual content of the script that we're working with. So the first thing first is, we need to change the name from express.js to something other than express.js. If you want to use express1.js, that's fine. It just cannot be express.js. I'll explain, the reason in just a little bit. So I changed my test URL just a little bit here. I declare a local variable called x and have it initialized to the string of default here. And then I also added a new line that will print an h1 element, and this time it's using the backtick. Okay, so you can see here, this is not a single quote, it's not a double quote, it's a backtick. So any content within the backtick is allowed to have this particular sequence, which starts with a $sign and a brace, and it ends with a brace. What it means is whatever is between the braces is an expression that gets evaluated, and then the value of that expression, the value of the expression, not the expression itself, becomes this portion of the string that we are writing to as a part of the response to an HTTP request. So under normal circumstances, we'll just have default basically put into this place here, so that we'll end up seeing default within the h1 tags, which means the default is going to be an h1 element like this. Okay, so we can I cannot refresh it because the script has not started yet. So now we go back to the first window here, which is how we're going to start it. So the way we start a script used to be just node and then the name of the script, and that will get it started. Well, if you want to use a debugger and you want to be able to reconnect to debug a program later on, which is very often the case that you need to do something like that, this is no longer sufficient. And instead, we're going to use a slightly different format, which is this. So this way, it is the beginning and the end are the same as what we usually do. But in between, we have what we call a switch, which is also called an option. And the option specifies --inspect equals to, and then this is the IP address of the local host, which is 127.0.0.1. And then we have a port number, which is 9320 in this case. So the way your port number should be is not going to be 9320. So the one that you are supposed to use is 93, and then followed by the 2 digits, which are the least significant or rightmost 2 digits of the port number for your scripts. So let me just kind of make that clear first. So if I look at my .port file, you can see this is my debug development sandbox. So this one is 413 instead of 412, and then ending with 20. That's where the 20 is coming from. So when you use this particular option, I want you to use 93 as the first 2 digits, the most significant 2 digits. But I also want you to use 20. In my case, whatever is are the least 2 significant digits of your port, use those 2 digits as the least significant 2 digits of the port number over here. So I'm going to start it, and it starts off a little bit differently because you can see how it gives me some messages here, that says debugger listening on port blah blah blah. So what it's doing is it is starting a inspector/debugger server, which is really just sitting there listening on a particular port. Unless something connects to it, it doesn't do a single thing. So that means I can now go back to my browser and I can refresh, and it prints what we expected it to do. Now we're going to go back to the command line interfaces, but this time we go back to the second one, this one here, and we're going to start node again. But this time we are trying to connect to the inspector. Okay, this is starting a client to connect to the inspector server. So we're starting the inspector client. You have to say node inspect, and then supply the IP address, which is 127.0.1, 127.0.0.1, and then the port number, which is 9320 in this case, and then you press the enter key. So let me explain this one more time. The original command here is starting the app itself. It's also starting an inspector server. This command here is starting an inspector client, which connects to the inspector server, which is over here. And you can see this is the new message generated. It says debugger attached because we have a client attached to the server at this point. And the program still runs as usual. Okay, I can refresh it again and nothing happens, nothing is different, okay, compared to before. So what we want to do now is to set a breakpoint. Now, where do we set a breakpoint? That's why it is handy to have one window just looking at the source code. So in this case, I want to put a breakpoint on line 19 because I want to show you how to change the value of a variable before we continue execution, so that this time it will print something different. Okay. So I'm not changing the source code. Source code stays exactly the same as it is. And I go back to the inspector client, and first of all, I set a breakpoint. So SB, and then you have to supply the file name, which is app.js in this case, and then you supply the line number, which is 19 in this case. Press the enter key, and now we confirm that on line 19 there is a breakpoint. Now, are we stopping there yet? No, because we have not re-triggered Express to run this particular function again. So right now, Express is basically just sitting around, taking a nap. Okay, so now we go back here and we refresh. So this time, after we refresh, you can see right here that Firefox is saying, "Hey, where's the response to the HTTP request that I sent?" So we kind of have to do this, within a certain time frame, because otherwise, Firefox is going to time out the connection. So also in the inspector client, we can see this is a new message. We are now currently breaking on line 19. So this is where we can change the value of x. And the way we do that is we start with REPL. So we can now evaluate expressions. So press the enter key, and it also prints the message of how to get out of REPL. So now the first thing we do is we just say, let's show me what is x. X is the string of default. Let's go ahead and change it to whatever, okay, with an exclamation point. Press the enter key. So now that we have changed the value of x, I can get out of REPL, evaluating the expression. So Control C will get me out, and then I can press C and then the enter key to continue execution. So the commands for the debugger is listed. I'll give you the URL. I believe that URL is in the text document that I have already published, but you don't have access to it yet because I lost wired internet access yesterday for the most part of the day. So anyway, the program now continues to execute, which means it will be able to finish the output of the H1 element and also get to the end of the response. So when we switch back to the browser, this time it prints whatever. In other words, this is one of the most important part of the inspector is, 1, you can stop executing at a particular point. 2, you can change the value of variables once you have stopped, once you have paused at a certain point. And 3, you can continue execution after that point. So it's really, really useful for debugging purposes in this case. All right, so you might say, okay, this might be the end of the entire lecture. Not quite, okay? So what we do is now get out of debug, and I think exit would do the trick. Not. Quit. Nope. Okay, let's try help. Okay, find out how to get out of the debugger. It doesn't quite show how to get out of the debugger, but one thing I know for sure is going to work is Control D. Control D always get out of whatever interface you're in, especially when it comes to the command line interface. And we're going to stop this program from running here. Now, the other thing that's also important is in the source code, you can see how I have console log at the beginning and also console log at the end of the function. These two are only sent to the command or the interface that started the running of the app.js in this case. It never shows up in the inspector client. So this is really kind of important because when you do a console log, it only goes to the command line that starts off the script. But when you use a debugger, it doesn't get to see the console log in the debugger client itself or the inspector client itself. So let me go back here and we'll stop this from executing. So now the next question is, okay, because we like to use PM, to start something, just so that we can keep it running while we sign out of a particular interface. So if you want to do something like this, okay, but from within PM2, so now we can take a look at PM2 and its options. So PM2-H, okay, which shows all the help. And unfortunately, this is not formatted in a way that's easy to read because it's assuming that you have more columns than 80 columns, which is the default in Xterm. So that's why things are not exactly aligned. So the option that we need to specify is the one that allows us to specify arguments to the command. And I'm just trying to look for that one. This one here. So --node-args allows you to specify the arguments that you're going to use to start up Node. So in this case, we're going to use the one that we saw earlier. So let's go ahead and start it. So PM2 and --node-args. And now we supply the --inspect equals to 127.0.0.1 colon 9320. Now remember, yours is not going to be 20. Yours is dependent on your dot port. So look at your dot port, find out what are the rightmost 2 digits, and use those 2 digits instead of 20 here. And now we can do app.js, and we'll give it a name. And we can call it app.debug, like so. And oh, I forgot one thing. I forgot start. Alright, so we have to specify start somewhere. And I think, we have to specify start here. There we go. Press the enter key. And now it has started. App.debug has now started. Which means I can now get out. I can sign out of this terminal now. So let me sign out first, okay? And I will even sign out from this one, which is the one that ran the inspect client earlier. So I'm going to sign out of this one, and I'll sign back in, okay? Like so. And we'll try to reconnect to the app that has the inspector server already up and running. So we say node inspect 127.0.0.1 colon 9320. Press the enter key and it reconnects. Now this is really, really important because now it means, so that means we can actually just reconnect to an app that is up and running, and now we can do all the same stuff that we did earlier. So remember what we did? We did an SB for setting a breakpoint, and the breakpoint is in app.js and on line 19. Okay, so it recognized the command, it found out exactly where the breakpoint is supposed to go, and then now we trigger, okay, the browser to go to that particular point by refreshing the browser. And then we switch back here, and now we are breaking at that particular point. So this time we go into REPL, and we'll give x a different value. So we'll say x equals to Another test. Press the Enter key, Control C to get out of REPL, and then the C to continue execution. So now when we switch back to the browser, which basically got the response after we continue execution in the inspector client, it prints another test in H1 as an H1 element. Now that is really kind of cool because now we can basically go back and reconnect to an app that is up and running and be able to debug it and also potentially change the value of variables. So let me do it a few more times. But before we go any further, I'm gonna look up how to exit the inspector, because I normally use Control D to get out, which may or may not be the best way to do it. Okay, Control C is one, but you have to press it twice. You can also use .exit to do it. Okay, so we'll go ahead and use .exit to get out. Okay, that works. And now I can leave the session again and then reconnect. So when I'm leaving and reconnecting, I'm basically emulating the fact that sometimes we do some development and then we take a break, we sign off, and then we sign back in. Okay, so this is once again me signing back in again, and we want to repeat what we just did. So we say node inspect 127.0.0.1:9320, and it reconnects, right? So we set up the breakpoint again, which is in the file app.js on line 19, like so. Refresh the browser, okay, and the browser is now stuck. We can see that it's waiting for the response coming back from the server. Switch back to the command line and REPL. Okay, so this is how we can evaluate expressions in the context of the program being run around the breakpoint. So now we can say x gets, let's try this. Let's try x gets x plus x. So it becomes default because plus means concatenation when the values being used are strings. So just like that, okay, it's default, and then we Control C to get out of REPL, and then the C to continue execution, and we can see now it is default as an H1 element. So this particular method is extremely useful when you are debugging your app, because now .exit is going to get us out of debug. This is what we tried last time, but Control C, two Control C's would do the same thing too. So Control C once, Control C one more time, and now we are back to the command line prompt, but the app is still up and running. Okay, the breakpoint, I think, is still active. I could be wrong. Okay, the breakpoint is gone too. So when you're outside of an inspector session, the breakpoints set by that particular inspector session would also be gone. So the app is now back to the non-break, the one that has no breakpoints. All right, that is rather cool, don't you think? I mean, I hope so. So going back here, this is the usual thing that we have already talked about. So if I were to change this code to use other types of elements, okay, so we're going to use H2 or H3 to make it more obvious in this case. Okay, if I change the code, then you have to restart it. Okay, so when we restart, we're going to use this particular window. And you might be saying, oh man, we have to retype this entire thing and remember how to do all this stuff here. No, you don't have to do that. And that's the beauty of PM2, because you can just do a PM2 restart and then give it the number, the index of the app that we want to restart. Or you can also supply the name that we want to restart, which is app.debug in this case. Press the enter. Oops. Oh, okay, I lost connection because I signed out already. I forgot about that. I forgot that I signed out already. So let's go back in. And then we do the same command. Okay, PM status first. Okay, always good to check whether it's still up and running. PM2 status. It is up and running. Okay, and this time we'll say PM2 restart. We can supply the number 5, or we can also use the name, which is app.debug. So we'll go ahead and say app.debug, press the enter key. Now it confirms it has restarted. we go back to the app and refresh it, and you can see how what used to be an H1 element is now an H3 element. So I want you guys to kind of replicate what I just did in this particular demonstration so that you get familiarized. Take your notes, okay? Take your notes, have your own cheat sheet created so that you can learn how to reproduce this particular process, because this is a very, very useful process for debugging your program. Now, there are several links here that are kind of useful too. This is one of them. You can actually, oh, you cannot see it. Well, the URL to this particular page was actually included in the notes that I'm gonna publish, so you're gonna get that too. So this is a list of the useful commands and how to use the various commands in the inspector. Some of these are more useful than others, depending on how you're debugging your program. But the important part is I have just told you how to use the inspector in an environment where you are not the only developer. Because if you were the only developer, then you don't have to deal with the port number and have to specify 9320. You can just go for the default. But because you are not the only developer on this particular server, you kind of have to play nice with other developers, and that's why we have to assign each developer, that person's own unique port number for the inspector server. Alright, so I think that's enough material for one video. I'm gonna upload this so that you guys can take a look at this and get started and experiment with how to debug in the Node environment.